Okay, so let us begin. So I sent this to you a while ago. It's- This is effectively the study guide, the word bank when we do bones. So it's basically what I wrote up there, but I just try to give it a little bit of, uh, just try to separate it when we start to do the bones themselves. And might as well dive right into it. I've got some bones out. I'll try to get through most of the axial skeleton today, depending on how well my voice holds out, but it shouldn't be too bad, hopefully. And we shall go from there. So without further, so you can keep referring back to this if you wish, and I will start. So this is on your week one. This will be 7A, B, and C have all the skeleton and related information that's there. So we begin. So we have here the skeletal system and bones, cartilage, joints, ligaments. We'll do the joints and ligaments a little more thoroughly when we do the joint related stuff. The cartilage for the time being at the end of the bones, unless we're talking about some cartilaginous structures, etc. Yeah, the fact that it's 20% of the mass, but number one on the hit parade, division, compartmentalization. The idea of being able to remember this or recall this, to me, is all about being able to put it into packages. So the first package we're going to deal with axial, and the next package will be appendicular. And again, by definition, the appendicular skeleton is not only the extremities, the appendages, where it gets its name, but the connectors, which means the hip and shoulder assemblies as well. So the number of bones is, I really don't care too much about. And I'm not a big fan of rights and lefts. As long as you know what bone it is, I'm happy. And the feature, I mean, if you, it's not. I don't think it's that difficult to discern, and I'll show you. Certainly, the most difficult region is the skull, as you will see, as I've written up there. There are 22 bones, 8 cranial, and by definition, what cranial mean? They're in contact with the brain. 14 facial, and basically they form the face. The vertebral column, which hopefully we'll get to some extent. There's not a whole lot. Ribs and sternum, there's not a whole lot to say about that, but we'll certainly get to it. So yeah, long axis of the body, head, neck, and trunk, brain, spinal cord, thoracic organ. It does. So you'll see these are similar illustrations, the color coding. So as you can see, the shoulder assembly, including clavicle and scapula, and the hip assembly are by definition part of the appendicular skeleton. This is all axial for our purposes, both front and obviously back. As you can see, we might as well dive into it right away. Said skull. So as you can see over on the board, what I have basically is, and yes, there's for effectively there's two sets. There's only two of these that are really in pairs, as opposed to the facial aspect of it. And yes, there's attachment for head and neck muscles as well. And the facial bones, certainly the framework of your face, the openings for special senses, air and food, securing the teeth, muscles of facial expression adhere to those bones as well as to the structure, the skin, the undersurface of your skin, so to speak. We'll talk more about that in muscles. A word of advice. It's my least favorite. Muscles are my least favorite thing to do. I spend very little lecture or lab time on muscles. Physiology, tons of time. Love muscle physiology. Name that muscle has just never had it for me. So we'll end up focusing on major muscles, less so than minor muscles when we get there. It's a pet peeve of mine. I have better things to talk about. Now, if you talk about muscles, muscles, now we're talking muscles. Little white wine, little chili flake, little garlic, little onion. Happy days. Crusty bread, butter. Stop. Toying with my emotions. And the skull bones themselves are not movable, save one. And the only one that moves in the whole thing is your lower jaw, the mandible. Okay? So that's the only one we're really concerned about motion. And the joints, particularly with regard to the skull, and particularly with regard to the cranial aspect, are called sutures. because they look like the old-time stitches, and I'll show those to you in a bit. Serrated or sawtooth appearance. And so here they are. So these are the cranial bones. This is frontal. This is one of the two parietal bones, one of the two temporal bones, the one occipital bone, and very, very difficult. This would be sort of the bottom portion called the pterygoid plate of the sphenoid bone. You can't even see the ethmoid that's there. And here are all the facial bones. The only one that moves, the mandible, maxillary. This is called the zygomatic, and we'll get to a few others. So we'll start with there. We'll take a look at the cranium, divided into the vault and base. Cranial vault more relevant because of its form, because of the pressure from the brain, forming what are called fossae or fossae, depending on how you pronounce it, or the cranial cavity. You'll see that it looks like this. Get started. So all of those things are really based on, so here's model of the skull, sun, mandible. If you take off the ECUs, take off those side pieces, it's not the one that fits, it's okay. That's what they're talking about. So you have these fossae, the anterior, middle, posterior, from portions of the brain sitting in it. So frontal lobe here, temporal lobe here, brachial occipital lobe, and probably a little bit of cerebellum. We're all going to sit in there. You can see a variety of openings, many of which we're going to address. Structures that protrude, structures that form, they're all uniform and all together. As I was commenting before, and it's hard to see from this particular model, in the undersurface area, you can see tiny little lines. Those are where lymph are located. And these are plastic models, obviously, that you can see here. But you would see the same thing if you look in the actual skull. You can see subtle indentations that are here as well. So it's not that far-fetched. So if I take something like, see if I can see it a little bit better, don't have the mated bottom to this page. And close enough, regardless. It's not the exact one, but for our purposes, it will do. So it sits a little bit like this, and this is what's meant by the suture. You see outline and that sort of a golden color that's there. So they give the appearance that sawtooth like this. Whoops. And when a baby's born, those are all what they call the soft spots. Because they are, and another name for them is they're called fontanelles. Found in that type of thing. So they are, what makes them sutural and interesting, they don't move their fibers towards the test. So they're kind of like this, and as the fibers material contracts and pulls them closer together. Get this kind of appearance. All have one thing in common. The sutures are all, in some way, shape, or form, at the juncture with the parietal bones. And the two bones that you have on top of your head. So and these kind of follow the planes that we talked about, frontal and sagittal plane. So where you have the two parietal bones meeting the frontal bone, you have the frontal or coronal suture, that plane that goes this way, the frontal or coronal plane. We have the two parietal bones coming together. We have what's called the sagittal suture. So it's the sagittal bone, so everybody is right and left. And in the back, it's an oddball. You see, I've drawn it upside down Y for all you sorority fraternity people. That's the letter lambda. And it's called the lambdoidal suture, but it's an upside down Y. You have the juncture here, sort of the bottom of the Y, the arms of the Y this way, with the occipital bone, and then here with the junction point of the parietal bone. So they're all about the parietal bone. And there's one last one. That's over here. It's a little less distinct. It's called the squamous or squamous suture, and it's the parietal bone and the temporal bone. And why they call it squamous, it's a little bit different. Squamous in some ways means shingle. So rather than being sutural where they come together, somewhat of an overlap. You look at it, that's where the rods is. Those are the significant sutures. We'll also see with the parietal bone, frontal or coronal works, sagittal, lamboidal, and then squamous or squamous. We'll also see with the parietal bone. So that's the first little nugget. And we're going to look at all of these wonderful holes. Not just the big one, but some of these other that are there. And so part of the test is not only knowing the names of the holes, but eventually what goes through them as we start getting cranial. Do this in my sleep. I'm going to fall out of bed and give a lecture on bones. Of course. I'm a bone freak. So there, as you can see, what's making the indentations. Oh, what an effort. We're so bad, we had to use that. And I was trying to set up our technology, and I had to use an HDMI cable. And I have one of the students in the other lab climb up because I couldn't. That's sad. That's sad. Sad state of affairs. So as you can see, frontal lobe, temporal lobe, and then here, this is mostly cerebellum down here. You can see where the fibers run. And we'll get to all that. That's there. So variety of cavities are in there, sure. The skull has, you don't have to know 85, 84 will be fine. Humor. Foramina, canals, fissures, spinal cord, major blood vessels, cranial nerves. And then an interesting schematic that you can kind of see. And you can see these little spaces are what you and I call sinuses. We'll get to those, but not so relevant now, a little bit more so in respiratory anatomy. But there's 4 bones, major bones in the facial area we call paranasal, around somebody have a sinus headache or a sinus infection. Frontal, sphenoid, ethmoid, and maxillary. There's also a sinuses here behind your ear, what's called the mastoid, but that's not around the nose, but it's similar. So, I mean, maybe my voice is still a little nasally from when you can always tell if somebody's got a cold or something like that because it fills those sinuses and basically they help to amplify and give a certain tone and timbre to your speech. And often you get to use the word timbre in a sense. Not that kind of timbre. Am I the only one who's fascinated by language that much? How can you mean what you say if you don't say what you mean? Right? Transparency. So, as you can see, and I wrote it up there, the only pairs are the parietals, which have very little anatomy other than the sutures. There's really nothing to say about them. And the temporal bones, which have a ton. And the sphenoid, which has the most, and the ethmoid is significant, and we'll go from there. There's not a lot to say about the frontal bone. It's your forehead. It's larger than you think. I don't have a plastic model of it. For whatever reason, it's been misplaced over the years. I was the reason we have that plastic model, and because I liberated it from CCAC many years ago. Bought it here, forgot to bring it back. Statute of limitations is expired. No, forgetting to take it back. It's different. It's just an error of omission. I forgot, rather than error of commission, because we didn't have one here. What can I tell you? They're expensive.
How much are they?
Oh, I don't know. Nowadays, hundreds of dollars for these stupid rubber bottles. It's ridiculous. Okay, so the frontal bone, thicker than you think. There's different regions. The only thing that's really noteworthy, supraorbital, is kind of like where your eyebrows are. You can feel that ridge. So supraorbital margin, the anterior cranial fossa is part of it. There's a little notch that if you kind of go over, you can almost feel more medial than lateral. The glabella, some fancy name I've never asked a question about, between the two orbital areas. And there's a sinus that's in there as well. And there's not a lot to it. What I have done, if you note where the asterisks are, those are bones that participate. There are 7 bones that make up the orbit. You need to know those bones. Fair warning. I'm giving you a practical question now. Don't say I never did you a favor. You have to know the 7 bones because you're going to have to name 4 of them on the practical. See, already a question. If you get that wrong, 20 lashes with a wet noodle. It's an old comment. Okay? It's a good thing Dr. Dress is no longer the department chair because he thought it was okay to hit students. I asked him, can you strike students? He goes, sure.
So we have to know the 7 bones
That make up to comprise the orbit. Of the cranial variety, you can see with the asterisk, frontal, which makes up the upper portion, superior aspect of the orbit. When we get to sphenoid and ethmoid, they're deep inside. We'll see those in a bit. And then on the facial side, you have the maxilla, the zygomatic, which is really your true cheekbone over here, the lacrimal, where that neat little bump is, and way behind your eyeball, there's an extension of a bone that makes up your hard palate, or the posterior portion of your hard palate, called, I beg your pardon, the palatine. So they're all in that neck of the woods. So here's frontal in that sort of golden or yellow color. You can see the upper portion just above the nasal bones are there. That's that little notch of foramen. Again, blood vessel and nerve go through it, not that terribly relevant for our studies that are there. So you can start to see these things. Parietal bone, you'll see this a lot. Parietal bone on the side, that's there. Deep inside, in that reddish, is the sphenoid bone, very interesting bone. Temporal bone over here. Here's the zygomatic bone. Again, that's really when we talk about cheekbone, it really is cheekbone. The nasal bone, which is not part of it. Bridge of your nose does not participate in the orbit. People often make that error. The lacrimal bone is in green here, and they may or may not have that tiny bit of palatine, though another illustration does. More of that. So now you can begin to see some divisions that are there. As you look inside, you're going to see that ridge. That's part of the ethmoid bone, which is very sort of deep and buried inside the cranial portion. And then this very interesting bone called the sphenoid. Sphenoid has the most anatomy, certainly. It's what's called a cornerstone bone. The maxilla is that in facial. What makes it a cornerstone bone, all the other bones participate with it. And all the other bones in your cranial portion all contact the sphenoid. So that makes it a cornerstone bone. And the same is true for the maxillary bone. All the facial bones have to make contact with that in some way, shape, or form. We'll get over there. Parietal bones, most superior sides, all the sutures that I mentioned before. Not a lot to say. When we get to the joints, we'll look more closely at them. And again, those soft spots are fontanelles that are there. The one that closes, if you're interested, by about, the beauty of it is that when a baby's born vaginally, a lot of times parents see that and they go, oh my God, the head is so distorted. The reality is it allows the baby to pass in the birth canal with some distortion, and then it returns because they're not fixed in place relatively shortly with regard to that. I don't have a context because again, I have 3 adoptive children. I never was there for the birth process. That was part of it. So I don't have a context to give it to you other than, basically what's written about it. And you can ask others who are. And the one that closes, this one, the one between the parietal and the frontal, that's the last fontanelle. That's the last soft spot that typically persists. That's there. Now, another thing that you'll see when you look at some of these illustrations are called sutural bones. A lot of times there's tiny extra bones we don't count, other than because they're distinctive boundaries. We feel they're a separate bone but they're along the sutures. There's a lot of little extra pieces of bone in the skeleton. Most of them they don't really have any functionality, but some have more than others that are there. So just adding that to the mix a little bit. And again, you see a lot of these illustrations repetitively. Don't be surprised. And most of them have color coding that's there. So let me look at all those. Same thing. Let's see if I can find some examples in color. We have here, or A on your list, this is the occipital bone. So far, at the front of the bone, forehead removed here, top here. Talked about the parietal bones on the side. The next one on the list is this guy, the occipital bone. So when they're all incorporated like this, it's a little hard to see. But it kind of sits in line like this. Yes. Really. That's the occipital. How do you know the occipital bone? It's the easiest bone, it's the biggest bone, the foramen magnum. So we had a lot of time. Here's looking at you. Do my rocker room thing. Rocker room fan.
Are they students who don't pass your class?
Pardon me?
Are these former students that don't pass your class?
Yes. We only hope. So this is the foramen magnum. On either side, the foramen magnum is nowhere near the brainstem. As it passes through that, it makes the transition to spinal. So it's the largest of the openings that are there, and it's so easily distinctive. Additionally, here and here, even though maybe they'll have it a little better in some of these, on either side are these rounded areas that, at least in these plastic models, are food. They are condyles. Condyle is, you might remember that from talking about bone features, are covered in cartilage. They participate in joints. This particular one, I think I saw it before. Are you hiding? Articulates, and that's the term we use when it forms a joint, for this guy. That's the first cervical vertebrae. And so the occipital condyles are the ones that join this bone. First cervical vertebrae is also known as the atlas. Remember, mythologically, Atlas holds up the globe. So that's called the atlas. And actually, there's another bone that sits in here that forms a pivoting joint called the axis here. It's really not the axis. So atlas and axis, the axis is C2, and we'll get to those. C1 and C2, respectively, they kind of look a little bit like this. Sort of stick them together. Again, this is sort of it might look good here. Kind of like that. Okay. And that's, so where it articulates or joins this first cervical vertebrae here. We're not done yet. There's one other piece of it, and there's in the back, bump back here, the external occipital protuberance, which means the bump that sticks out the back of your head. It just sounds better when you say external occipital protuberance. And the ridges that are formed there are from something called an aponeurosis, known as the ligament nuci. That's what I call this nuchal area. It's a thick, sort of half ligament, half tendons band that muscles attached to. And again, it's very interesting. I spare no expense. It's this guy. So on either side, you're going to see an opening. In sort of almost on the rim of, we have one over on this side, one, two, up. Still happy. I'm a happy guy. I'm worried about the game. I'm masking my You want to get through. Gotcha. Hold on. Those openings are not necessarily artificial. They are called hypoglossal canals. What goes through that is the hypoglossal nerve which allows you to stick out your tongue. It's controlled. Last, going from top to bottom of your ear and your cranial nerves. So that's what their job is. Okay? Good. That is the occipital bone. Now, it's not quite done yet. If you look at it from the bottom, there's sort of a confluence point between the occipital bone here and the temporal bone. This way, it identifies that red spike. It's an influence styloid process. You can't feel it. And that area, that cleft that forms there, the hypoglossal canal, very, very close to it over here. So that's the hypoglossal canal that I was pushing out before. If you go adjacent to it, in this area, you see a rather large opening. So at the juncture point between the occipital bone and the temporal bone, you kind of have the formation of this. It's called the jugular foramen. The jugular, and its major structure that passes is the jugular vein. But the jugular foramen is kind of a busy place. It has at least 3 other cranial nerves that go along that go through that particular opening here. So you can always tell the difference between a vein, an opening for a vein, and let's say a rounded area for an artery like this. Okay? That's called the carotid canal. That's probably more in the temporal bone. But arteries generally maintain their rounded appearance, where veins kind of flatten out here and out, so they're a little bit more regular. So those are a couple of the structures that are in. So I would make this temporal occipital junction more about the jugular foramen and the carotid canal being much more associated with the temporal bone. The temporal bone, I have it up on it. Well, so here's a temporal bone. Use one of that rubberized models that I don't use. Fish the fairway. You know what that means? Yiddish, not so. So it kind of looks like this. What do you got there? The classic anatomy has got 4 different regions. Not for a small bone. This is the mastoid, which is behind your ear, and directly behind the most notable bit of anatomy, which is here, which is the external acoustic gaze. Okay? So that's the mastoid region. You have the temporal region, which is the shelf, the plate that sits above it. There's the styloid process. That's the process, again, things attached here. So you have the mastoid has very significant muscles. Here, there's the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This, so here and there. The styloid process has a lot of muscles that help with your tongue, speak, those kinds of motions, swallow. So it's an anchor point, so it's covered up by that same sternocleidomastoid. This is called the zygomatic process. A lot of times we name things in the body either for what they look like, or in the case of the zygomatic process, where it's going. So the zygomatic process, if you want to look over here you are looking on the left. Here's the external acoustic gauge. This is the zygomatic process. And it forms what's called the zygomatic arch. That part that we often refer to as our cheekbone, even a true cheekbone. That goes to this bone, which is the zygomatic bone. So a lot of times we name, so the zygomatic bone has a temporal process, and the temporal bone has a zygomatic process, and 2 of them come together to make the zygomatic arch. That's an important bone because one of your major chewing muscles, the temporalis, which is here, goes through here and inserts into the mandibles, which is powerful. another muscle that is attached called the masseter, which is even more powerful joint muscle that takes its origin from that same side of that arch. So it's a big player. If we look on the bottom, and you can see this, it's a little beat up, but here's the styloid process, here's the mastoid, and here's another little opening. It's not something artifactual, it's not just here. It's called the stylomastoid brain. That's a really important opening because the cranial nerve goes through it. That's the facial nerve, the seventh cranial nerve. You'll see it's right in that area. Let me get a man. Let me pull it out in a minute. Because that stylomastoid foramen, right about here, just behind the mandible, is often active. So a lot of times people have facial dysfunction movement. They have something called temporomandibular joint disorder. This is the mandible. That was the temporal bone. There's a notch or a fossa as part of the notch. It's the only joint that moves in the skull. That's the temporomandibular joint. So it's a fair amount of anatomy in this relatively small bone. So you have, again, the external acoustic meatus, okay, zygomatic process, styloid process, mastoid, stylomastoid foramen sort of under there, between the two in that area. You have that notch or fossa for the mandibular condyles, called mandibular notch. Now the interior, often called the petrous or petrous side. This is really important because you have the internal acoustic meatus. In this sort of portion of bone, it's located for balance and hearing apparatus. The semicircular canals of cochlear runs. All of that's anatomy associated with the temporal bone. This is wrong. It goes on here. Now, somewhere, and I'm going to have to go through this, try and organize this. I'll probably have to do it. We used to have an actual bony model that was pretty good, a real temporal bone, so you'd be able to see. So we've got frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, and now we have the heart. Those were the heart. But maybe this is a good, it's a real skull. Look inside. Start with the ethmoid bone. I always say stay sphenoid for last. I don't have an ethmoid. Rubberized model. And so when I use ethmoid, I do it with, I use a lot of times, like for these bones, I'll print out the color images that you see here. I'll have the bones out, and I'll have a color image so you have it. How do you chart? Sure. See that ridge, this guy in here? See that? Pretty distinct shell bone. It's called the Christogal. That exits in there. For all you martial arts fans, that's the portion of bone that forms because the meninges, the coverings of the brain, create that. They form. That's also the ones where you can kill somebody by shoving bone into their brain. Like that. So that's one of those, all those martial arts type. Pardon me? Yeah, the fox, correct. Same to you, buddy.
What does that mean?
Fox. I thought you told me to fox myself.
Bullet.
See, that's better. See, it's like an old joke about what did one shepherd say to the other shepherd? Let's get the flock out of here. You never heard that? It's like Stein's Mary had a little lamb rule. Wherever sodium goes, water is sure to follow. I have rules like that. Moving on. So I'll show it to you. External occipital protuberance, nuchal lines, undersurface, temporal bones, zygomatic, fossa, tympanic, is hearing around the external acoustic meatus, petrous or petrous portion, jugular foramen, carotid canal. We'll get to the foramen lacerum. It's really not a true opening. It's artifactual. It's filled with cartilage. Nothing goes through it. We just see it. I'll show it to you shortly. Meatus and stylomastoid are part of it. There's the actual temporal bone showing you before. Mastoiditis, something I've seen in diabetics. We're going to pass sphenoid and come back. This is ethmoid. That's the shelf. So Christa, because it's cruciform or cross shape, it has a portion that goes upright called the Christa galli. It has a portion that points downward called the perpendicular plate because it's perpendicular to this, which is called the cribiform plate. And within the cribiform plate, there are tiny foramina called, as we would suspect, called cribiform foramina, and they are the openings that the olfactory nerve, so you can smell, the olfactory bulbs sit on either side of the Christa galli. And these, as well as being ethmoidal sinuses, are also, these masses are what add surface area to the interior of your nasal cavity that really enhance our ability. Smell is all about surface area. So the more surface area you have covered with what are called olfactory lining or epithelia, the more you're able to smell. That's there. So my pooch, who has a poodle nose, because he's part poodle, I mean, if I get anything out of the kitchen, all of a sudden I have a neighbor. It doesn't matter. It's like I can't hide it. I get a cookie, he's like, I think there's a cookie. You're sharing with me, aren't you?
You give them some?
Always. I'm a soft touch. I'm terrible. Worst thing for dogs is people food. He just doesn't know that. Space. He's part of the family. So schematically, I draw it like this. So you have this feeling. This is those masses. There's little openings here for the nerves. So factory bulb, see that on the sheet rate, we can say. Here, this is the Christa galli, the CG. This is the perpendicular plate. That's called the cribiform. They're really important structure. That's the deepest bone. It's almost, if you imagine, and it makes up part of the orbit. It's almost like if you push your fingers and push way back and up. That's kind of where it is. It's quite deep in your skull. So that doesn't have a ton of anatomy, it's just for the bone. The one that has all the anatomy, I'm getting backbone. That shape. This is the sphenoid. Sphenoid, got it. Sphenoid has wings, lesser wings. It has greater wings. The greater wings and lesser wings together make up a good deal of the posterior back wall of the organ. In those wings, where they come together, if you're looking at it this way, these are actual clefts that are present. They are referred to as the superior, because they're the top orbital, which is the orbit fissure. So a fissure differs from a foramen, which is more of an opening, sort of a triangular shaped opening. That area, we have several nerves that pass. Third, fourth, sixth, part of the fifth cranial nerves, all heads to the skull by that. Third, fourth, and sixth are responsible for extraocular eye movements. The fifth is called the ophthalmic branch, fifth cranial nerve, and the trigeminal nerve, and that has sensation. I want this number here. They're extraordinarily important. If you look closely, I've sort of marked it here, so you're looking here from the top down. Lesser wing, greater wing. Now you can see this sort of cavity-like depression, sort of like a bony enclosure. Anytime in the human body you see a bony enclosure, something important is in there. Thoracic cage, the heart, the lungs. Here, this is a saddle-shaped area. It's called the sella turcica, or Turk saddle. And in it sits the pituitary, master gland. On either side of this critical area, you have the master gland for your endocrine system. Pituitary covers basically everything. On either side, not going where the superior orbital fissure goes straight, optic canals go at an angle. One goes this way, one goes that way. See? The optic nerves coming from your eye. Okay, remember that this is the back, this is the eyeball is here. The optic nerves are bringing sight this way and that way, crossing over pituitary. That crossover is called the optic chiasm. About 90% of your sight comes from your left eye goes to the right side of your brain, and right to the left side. About 10% stays on the same side. That accounts for what's called stereoscopic visual depth, the way that it's arranged. We're not done yet. Overlying the optic chiasm, overlying the pituitary, is a circle of blood vessels called the circle of Willis. That's the major blood supply to the interior of your brain. So that's a really critical area. Why, when someone has pituitary tumors, why you're always at risk of blindness and you have to improve them, or getting blood that's like that person. So that's just a super critical area. Sella turcica, and you can see the distinction between the angle of the optic canal, or optic foramen, because superior orbital fissure. You go this way, you're going to see an opening below the superior orbital fissure that kind of goes straight. It's very round. It's called the foramen rotunda. That's another branch of the cranial or maxillary. And then the largest opening is below it here. This is called the foramen ovale, because it's oval. And that's the last of the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve. Not only a sensation, but also the muscles of master. So it's a big player. And we're not done yet. There's another little branch over here that's now sort of like a little spine shape. It's called the foramen spinosum. Opening the spine. It doesn't have a nerve, it has a blood vessel. Blood vessel is very important, supplies most of the blood supply to the meninges, but the middle meningeal artery. Branch of the maxillary artery, you get the blood vessel. Oh, one more thing. These guys. These are called pterygoid plates. Medial and lateral pterygoid plates. There are muscles that attach them that help you move your jaw side to side, front to back. Called pterygoids. They named them because they look like the wings of a now called pteranodons or pterodactyls. Remember that? Pterygoid. We had a pterodactyl named Terry who was a Pee-wee's Playhouse. Wait, recently deceased. Great zoo show back in the 80s. But was he's different. He was different. Very, I was clear, you know, what's his name? Cowboy Curtis. Lawrence Fishburne, who figured 1,000 movies. Now very mature, kind of a guy, but very white things. And he got his start in Apocalypse Now. Crazy for a couple of Vietnam War effort. He was very young, and then shortly after that, he put the Cowboy Curtis. So all of that. Now it looks by itself here, but you can't. It's all incorporated. Because remember, it's not a free little well, they're down here. These are the pterygoid plates right behind the heart. So it's very hard to discern that. Like I said, when you look inside the skull, Now you see artifactual. This is called the inferior orbital fissure. Those are cartilage. Now, when they prepare bone and boil away all the soft tissue, it shows up that the cartilage disappears. There's nothing in there. It's little cartilage. Same thing over here. There's another fragment it's there, we don't talk about here. It's called a foramen lacer. Looks like a little laceration or tear. Again, filled with cartilage. Okay. So this is all valve, this is spinosum. One over here, this is lacerum. So it's closer to the midline on either side of the cell first. So I mean, there's all sorts of little nuances when it comes to bone. We did it. We did the hard part. Those am the skull bones. I'm ecstatic. I'm happy. Son's a little distressed that they postponed that hearing for 2 months, but we'll get over it. Now, I mentioned not to have children. Just saying. So here we are again. There's the sphenoid, hat-shaped bone, keystone. All the others has sinuses, sella turcica, hypophysis or hypophyseal means pituitary. That's another name for the pituitary. So the fossa is that indented area. The whole bony enclosure is the sella turcica. Greater wings, lesser wings, and pterygoid processes, optical canals, superior orbital fissure, rotundum, ovale, and spinosum. Completely, and I'll print all of these up for you, so you'll be able to see it. We do practicals. I mean, I have to draw they obviously don't have labels, so I draw like lines with Sharpie. I realize on practicals that I can't be exact, so it's like horseshoes, close counts. You know? So I could easily be pointing to. You could give me 2 or 3 answers that I'd have to accept. Begrudging. I would. Despite what Haley says, I am not. I don't even like her.
I've never heard nothing but negative.
Yeah, she's good because she likes me. I'm not pleasant. So, that's it. Who am I kidding? What's wrong with this picture? What time is it? Oh, 18 minutes ago, my eldest and his wife left for their 10th anniversary cruise to the Bahamas. I'm here. WTF? Did they invite me? No.
Where's the flock?
What?
Where's the flock?
Where's the what? The F?
Where's the flock?
The flock. Yeah, out of here. It's just not fair. Oh, we're going to cruise. What are you doing? My wife is home sick. So that's my same picture, sutural bones, done. Facial bones. The only one that there's any anatomy to worry about is the mandible. Okay, everything else is just name that bone. So, and they're all paired except for the vomer. It's interesting. Your nose. You look at the nasal cavity. Okay. Now, I just erased it the perpendicular plate. If this is the nasal cavity, perpendicular plate isn't just a shelf that goes down. This is the perpendicular plate. Other single bone that's in there kind of goes out. It's like a cloud. That's called the vomer. So that's the only other single bone in addition to the mandible. So I might as well put the mandible on here. And the mandible's got a fair amount of anatomy. And the only one that moves, these are mandibular condyles. So they're covered in cartilage, they make up the central mandibular joint. This is called the mandibular notch. Little notch. This is called the coronoid tubercle. And it's a coronoid colon. And this is again another attachment for that temporalis muscle. And then You have this whole area is called the body. They call these that project wings, and this area where the wings meet the body are called the angle of the jaw. That's important anatomically. If you're going to do CPR, you palpate that and go backwards to CPR. So that's an important area. It sort of gives you access to the carotid artery palpation. Inside, there is a nice little foramina called the mandibular foramina. There's also one here called the mental. The mandibular foramina is the one, and that's why anatomy is so important, particularly surface anatomy like this, is those are areas, in this community there's a nerve, part of the mandibular branch, trigeminal nerve, that supplies sensations to your lower jaw. So if you have, a dentist, you have a cavity in the bottom, they inject with one injection. So they inject back there, that little side, you're trying to keep something out of it. Where the upper jaw, they have to be separate. Not. I don't have to actually. It's like going to the car, you're like going to you drop your car off. Are you going to wait with your car? You do that in this. Are you going to wait with your teeth? No, I'm not. Take my and so that's the part, we use that surface anatomy for the purpose of the injection. See if there's any, and everything else is just names of bones. So let's see if we're here we are, mandible. Largest and strongest. The body, mostly the chin area and the rami, the angle. Coronoid process, not conoid, coronoid process. And then the condylar process, that's where the condyles are that are covered in cartilage. And really there's the mandibular nerve, there's a little opening, mental foramina, not significant. It's there. And then the other bones are all sort of attached. Again, I have someone floating around. So this is a good one. One I'm missing is and periodically yellow and periodically green. Oh, take an extra mandible out of it. I don't like it. Okay. Sort of what it looks like. So here we'll start with all of those. In white, those are the nasal bones. And they're not part of the eye, the orbit, but they're there. So when you break your nose, that's when you break your nose. The rest of it, this person's cartilage. This is that sort of purplish color. And the reason why they classify this as a single bone, if you're born, the two pieces are fused together. This is not. Okay. And so even though, and typically it does fuse, but when some individuals, the opening persists more dramatically. So since this is your palate, that opening is called a cleft palate. Sometimes you cannot see a cleft palate. Sometimes a cleft lip, they do have a cleft palate, but not the other way around. We mistakenly think that cleft palates are associated with mental limitations. And while that is frequently true, it's not always. What is the problem? Why do you have to repair a cleft palate? It distorts two things. One, the sucking reflex for infants is a big problem. That's major. Plus, that opening potentially is a pathway for infection. So it basically can be opening for infection. That's why. That's why they're yellow. So that's the hard palate. And the reddish color is the palatine bone. It's sort of two L-shaped bones that come together. This little high spot, that's part of the organ. By definition, I don't know that it necessarily is, but it's considered to be part of the organ. Those two bones together make up your heart valve. Maxillary palatine. This little guy in here is one of the turbinates. It's more, again, bony material that increases the surface area of the nose. It's amazing consequential. The bone where I'll find it one day, sits inside there, but I drew it for you. And then the lacrimal bone, so what you can feel it. It's got that little lacrimal caruncle. You get a little bump on the medial aspect inside your organ next to the nose. That's where your tear duct is. And that's basically so you just know the name. The only one that has any additional anatomy, the only one that moves. Mandible, not maxillary. Oh, I can't believe I got through all those bones in an hour. Again, inferior orbital fissures, nothing really goes through there. See, and none of these are terribly important. Here's the vomer, that undersurface I didn't have. That's really the lower portion of the nasal, bony nasal septum. Cheekbones, again, zygomatic process. Nasal, lacrimal, not a whole lot. Pound, vomer. Again, these are these inferior turbinates or inferior nasal conchas, same thing. And again, along with these, which are part of the ethmoid, again, are all about surface area. I'll never ask you about it, I promise. Not that important. And again, that was that illustration with perpendicular plate and vomer, and then this is cartilage. Take it from somebody who's I've broken my nose a lot over the years. And the hyoid we'll get to when we do muscles. The hyoid would have failed kindergarten for bones. It's the only bone that doesn't connect with another bone. It doesn't play well with others. Like that. The only bone in the body that does not articulate directly with another bone. Basically, it forms because of pressure of muscles that allow us to speak and to swallow. So it anchors the tongue. There's one that goes through the hyoid from the styloid process, from the musculature here going down toward the thyroid area. So they all play a significant role with regard to speech and swallowing, but with regard to being a bone of any consequence, no. Movable base for tongue, swallowing.
It's nice to look like.
Pardon me?
It's nice to look
To some extent, yeah. It's more forensically relevant because when somebody's strangled, typically there's a fracture. That's one of the tells for being strangled. If you're fascinated by me, the best show ever, it's now got 28 seasons. Silent Witness is on BritBox, which we get. It's just incredible. You learn more forensic stuff from that than any other show. And there it is. It's got greater horns and lesser horns. And then the orbits themselves, the 7 bones I mentioned, you need to know. Again, something goes through there, nothing through there. Blah, blah. And then the openings for the nose and paranasal sinuses. Those are the paranasal ones. Well, I love that. I'm so happy. So now give me about 15 minutes. Maybe we'll get through most of this other stuff and say au revoir, adios. So let me get back and do the next one. This is it. Part C is the appendicular skeleton. And if anything, I think it's a little easier than a little harder. We start here with the spinal column, okay? And really, it's about the vertebrae. Part of what you'll need to know is, and it's easy, is how to distinguish between vertebrae from the 3 major sections, cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. And it's very straightforward, okay? So they are, by definition, they're irregular bones. Okay, 7 cervical. You already saw the first 2, C1 and C2, which are more about supporting the head and allowing you to go yes and no, basically is what they do. 12 thoracic, 1 for each of the ribs, 5 lumbar, and you have 7, 12, and 5 years. 1 sacrum, which is really a fusion of 4 or 5 bones, and a coccyx, which is sort of relatively vestigial, tiny, sort of cruelly foam bones, maybe 2 or 3, which is more of a problem when you hurt your tailbone when you sit down the wrong way. There are curvatures. Okay, this gets back to a little bit of embryology. So understand, when we're born, if you think of when a baby is born, they're very C-shaped. So the curvature is basically the curvature of the spine is nearly looking from back to front is convex, rounded here in the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral areas. Okay. As babies undergo the 2 major transformations to when we see the adult spine, it has to do with first the cervical and the lumbar curvatures reversing themselves. What are those 2 events? Everybody knows them. Roughly between 3 and 6 months, babies get head control. So their heads like this has to be supported when they're born. Roughly between 3 and 6 months, they're able to do this. That's when the secondary curvature, the convexity here, the concavity rather here, develops. The next major event, on average, and it varies, between 12 and 15 months, that the child becomes ambulatory. And my kids are in all stages. My daughter started walking when she was 9. My middle one, we thought we'd be carrying until he was 6. But it was about like 16 or 17 months. And so what happens is that's the lumbar curvature. They can now be upright. That develops secondarily. So you see it here. So here you can see what happens. These are the primaries, the ones that are thoracic and sacral. The secondary, reversing it now, concave here and concave here. Okay, there's a ton of ligaments that are there, okay, connecting, and you'll see all these illustrations. Ligaments basically hold bones together. And the spinal area is replete. The interesting thing about your spine and all those vertebrae is they really are joints that move very little. They slide and glide a little bit. But when you add up somewhere around, you take 7, 12, and 5, you got 24 there, then it won't move a little bit, you get a lot. Okay, so and the same thing, your wrist is very, very similar in that regard. You end up with a lot of motion because all of them move a little and some obviously move more than others. So they go over all these, and what separates them is this. These are intervertebral discs. Okay, talked about that a little bit in compression fractures. The disc is basically fibrocartilage, and in the center, the core is that nucleus pulposus, that sort of gel-like, which is neat. If you think of, if we're jumping up and down for a reason, if we jump off something down to the next step or two, you have a certain amount of inherent shock absorption from them. So here you can see ligaments both anteriorly and posteriorly. The discs themselves, that gelatinous pulpy nucleus, pulpy core, elasticity and compressibility. Annulus means rounded. So the round fibers on the exterior, annulus fibrosis, outer collagen and fibrocartilage, and it's the nucleus pulposus. When you hear about a slip disc or a bulging disc, it's that nucleus pulposus that bulges due to irregularity or damage or weakness in the fibrous surrounding of it. So here they show it to you. So look what happens. Now, yes, a compression fracture could contribute to this or be precipitated by it. And here you can see the spinal cord, which is smaller than you think, in the middle, and you can see it being distorted, and now effectively this pinches a nerve root. In general, this is posterior, this is anterior. Motor roots are anterior, sensory roots are posterior. So depending on where it is herniated and pressed, it can either cause absence of sensation, awful painful sensations, absence of ability to move, limited ability to move, funny sensations known as paresthesias. There's a myriad of things that are responsible. So we'll get to the orientation. Here's an MRI demonstrating that herniation. And so I'll show you with the discs how they're designed to maintain the openings that are there. So there's any one of these things, rupture of the annulus, as I said, all the different signs and symptoms, lots of ways to treat it. I've had sufficient surgery that I would not even contemplate having. I haven't seen a ton of great results with back surgery. I think they do it better now than they used to. There's better things you can do with more limited incisions. In the old days, you really had to they opened it up, and they did fusions, and they really limited activity. My only lament is it's very hard for me to play golf anymore. It's hard for me before. Just try it. I have a brother-in-law who's 80 and a half, and he shoots his age. I hate that. He was always a choose-up team, basketball, baseball, tennis, amateur champion. I hate that. Good. Wonderful husband for mine. They've been married for 55 years plus. Here's another what's wrong with this picture. Allow me to elucidate. Today's the 18th, right? Yeah. Oh, they're leaving the 21st for our 3-week trip to London, Amsterdam, Bruges in Belgium, and Madrid. Where will I be? Here with you. What did I do wrong? We went up to Erie and let the dog race around in Presque Isle for 2 nights.
That's kind of like Amsterdam.
Hey, it's like Amsterdam. Yeah, sure. I'll keep telling myself that. They're going on a cruise. I'm sure my daughter's going to the game tonight. So I demand a recount. This is what you asked about before with the abnormal curvatures. Today, this is why when you talk about the spine, you talk about, when we get to the anatomy, spine refers to these processes you're going to get the spinous process. So they're not really the spine sort of almost misnomer. And those spinous processes, 3, 5, 7, and 12, etc., are very distinct. So what happens when you go to the doctor and they want to check for scoliosis, children and children of puberty, they have you bend over and finger, and you get an S curve. That's what scoliosis is. Basically, they're palpating these, particularly the ones in the thoracic area. I can't do it with this one, but it bends forward. So scoliosis, lateral rotation, typically thoracic, can be a problem with it. Again, I think it's more common. It doesn't always have to treat. It's more complicated comparatively speaking. Where, and they always show you the dramatic ones. This is the kyphosis or hunchback. Okay, abnormal thoracic common equal osteoarthritis. And this is from compression fracture. TB, exposed to bone. Rickets, we talked about osteomalacia. Most of the hunchback disorders we see there are with osteoporosis and those related problems, as opposed to like somewhat born with a hunchback, which is a different kind of thing. So they look similar. And then kyphosis, and then lordosis, which is way back, is that, and you see a lot of pregnancy and, big bellies, trying to classify as, but they don't have, not kyphotic or lordotic. So you see the illustrations. These are dramatic. This elderly lady, this is what's happening, because of compression fractures have created that enlargement that's there, and obviously pregnancy. So you always see the same illustrations. They haven't changed them in years. A generic vertebrae is very distinctive, and it's and you'll see this illustration because I do use it. So it kind of looks like this: the front, the bottom. I'll do the schematic. And so what you're going to see is it sort of looks a little like this. Spinous process, that one. These are called lateral processes on each side. This is the opening, that's the vertebral canal. In this case, that forms when you stack them on the spinal cord. This is referred to as lamina, Lamina, see the illustration. Okay, and that, we're not done yet necessarily. So when you see these, I'll just take some generic over there. So there's a real bump. I was told the body that way, it's easier to see. So things that you can tell, and obviously this isn't clear, but you can see vertebral canal, that's there. The lateral ones broken off, there's the spinous process. You'll begin to see the difference when I have some other ones. And now, going up, this is superior intervertebral. Okay, and eventually it becomes a process and it mates with another one, so to speak. It's like these aren't really designed, but there's a disc that you can see. So even though those may not necessarily match, it's kind of like that. So you have a superior intervertebral process and an inferior one. When they come together, they make this intervertebral arch or passageways, actually spinal nerves, going outside to side. So the disc facilitates that. In the absence of the disc, so when you don't have the disc, basically that opening can be compressed or open. When you have the disc, it maintains. We have some that have the disc in them, some of the specimens are actually that are there. So it gives you an idea. How do you know the distinction between them? This isn't this ligament T4. Thoracic vertebrae, the spinous process points to that. As a fine point, you can also look at these facets. These thoracic, they tend the superior ones tend to point posteriorly, the inferior ones anteriorly. You can see the lateral processes that are there. And they're going to have little attachments with ribs on those. So you can see any of those that point downward like that. When you look at lumbar, changes now, they don't just point posterior because the forces on them are going posterior medial. The power associated with them. And the spinous process is like an axe handle. Cervical is easiest of them all. The cervical always has those little openings aren't artifactual. They aren't something where they could put it together. Vertebral canals disproportionately wide. Those are called vertebral. This is I'll get it for you. It's a vertebral foramen. Okay, that's there, and you're going to see, and vertebral canals you're going to see. This one is called a transverse. myself here. These are not lateral processes, they're transfers. Processes. And these are transverse foramina. When they stack up in the cervical vertebrae, they are part of an extraordinarily important circulation. These passageways all come together. We have a model elsewhere, but I don't see it just by taking a quick glance at that. So energetics. Come on, Peter. See the artery that's going through that? This is a secondary circulation going to the brain, called vertebral arteries. They go through the stack of these strands. So again, anything that's got bones surrounding it. So that's how you know the distinction between cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. But they all have the same basic idea. So here's what I was trying to draw before. You can see these superior and articular and inferior articular ones. So they're just showing you from the top. Body's anterior, spine is. So here they're giving you one like that little is called a demifacet. Ribs attached by way of that. It's very hard to see on most of our specimens, but there's a little demifacet on here on the body of a thoracic vertebrae and on the transverse process. So the ribs don't, I mean, because they move very, very well. That's their sort of limited attachment that's there. It's another way you can tell if it's a, pardon me, if you can tell if it's a thoracic vertebrae. So all the different processes, spinous, transverse, 2 going up, 2 going down. See 1 through 7, smallest and the lightest, and you'll see them, and you'll get a chance to look at these. We'll probably do that next week. C3 through 7, very, very similar. Okay, the C7 spinous process is palpable at sort of at the base here. Bifid means it forks. Hello. It's right there, right under that upper. You don't have to stick around if you don't feel good, and obviously you don't. You okay? More or less? You're fine. I'll see you on Wednesday. Have fun storming the castle. She's a little mature. She's a little mature. I like her. You'd be that way too if you were rooming with Chelsea. Pardon me? I no surprise. Would you like a dog? I've got a big dog you might like. No, I'm talking. Sure, no, I talk myself. Yes, I'm joking. I have 2 cats. He'll stay with you. Over here. They got to get rid of that unstoppable. Hold on, did it? I'm coming. It didn't come through. I had a picture of the dog. We'll save it for. We'll save it. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, moving on. The transverse foramina for the vertebral artery. So that's useful. And it goes. And so here's the distinctions. Transverse process isn't that distinct, but it's there. Proportionally, you can see the size. The spinal cord is much thicker as it exits the brain, as the brain stem becomes the spinal cord. This is all the nerves that are going up and down are basically there. It gets lesser as it goes thoracic and lesser still as it's in lumbar. This is the distinction, that declinated spinous process And here you can see that sort of short spinous process. I showed you C1 and C2. The atlas does not have a body or a spinous process. It's got these big masses with large condyles that are very much sort of concave, convex shape. So they fit those occipital condyles that are there. So you can see these lateral masses and this very distinct concavity that sits on it. And then the axis, most people say effectively it has the body of the other vertebrae, and it's got this tooth-like projection they call the dens or odontoid process. And we're going to look at the joint. It's a pivoting joint, so I'll be showing it to you again. It's this piece. So there are two bone unit, again, that allows, and they sort of sync with your head motion side to side till they all sort of work together in that regard. That's there. So here's what they are. That's that tooth-like process from behind, so to speak. And then you can see the bifid, and that's because of the pull and tug of the soft tissue structures. Thoracic, body's more heart-shaped, the demifacets for the ribs, and you saw that illustration before. Lumbar, short, thick, very, very large pedicles and lamina, that hatchet-shaped spinous process, more triangular vertebral foramen. And without going crazy over this, there's not a lot to say about a sacrum. I mean, there just isn't. I wish there was, but there's not. And I mean, you probably have a few of these that are disarticulated somewhere. I'm going to show it to you this way. This is the sacrum itself. It's got noteworthy, and I'll get one out next time we can show you, particularly with your joints. It's got an ear-shaped area called the auricular process. And for whatever reason, I do not have a really good example here of the hip assembly. But it bases the hip assembly and it creates this two rough areas of sacroiliac joint. That really is the foundation that holds the lower extremities, that are there. And you see it, they're all fused. And what happens is the intervertebral foramina, rather than going sideways, now do more front to back. All the other ones above it, lumbar, thoracic, cervical, the nerves come out sideways. Now they come out front to back. Then it has bridge. This is like a fusion of the spinous processes. This is some bridging up here. A little coccygeal area, which is something so vestigial, it's almost really not worthy discussion, I think. Yeah, they're there. So now, I mean, so they're fairly sacrum, and there's not a whole lot to say about it. I'll do more with the sacrum when we get it, and really, it's this auricular surface. It's really this. It's a lot of surface area, much more so. You will see that when we start talking about where the sternum and the clavicle come together, it's much more. And it's all about the availability of motion. That's there. These are some of the anatomical landmarks I don't really delve into. You can see it here a little bit better. Here you can see these sort of fusion of the spinous processes that are there. Ribs are ribs. I mean, I can't say a whole lot about it. The talking point. You have 12 ribs. 7 of them are considered true ribs. What makes a true rib? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you look at these, they each insert by what's called costal cartilage into the sternum directly. What makes 8, 9, and 10 unusual, as well as 11 and 12, 11 and 12 don't attach at all. They're called floating ribs. 8, 9, and 10, here's 10, here's 9, here's 8, all have cartilage that attach to other cartilage, which attaches to the cartilage of the 7th, and then into the sternum. So they're called false ribs. So the false ribs are 8 through 12. with 11 and 12 being consistent as floating ribs. And ribs are, there's not a lot to them. Yeah, I don't know if I pulled those out. It has some anatomy, little protection for thoracic vertebrae, and bigger. I mean, some are larger and some are smaller. Nothing really, I have a whole tray with this. Some of them are rounded like that. Depends on where they are. This is different. Wow. There's some clavicle, whether they might pierce it or not. This is more in the shelf. It's not really true longbow, but it's more like it certainly in the ribs, certainly in the thigh. Sort of on. Then we'll talk about the sternal end and the acromion end, and the appendicular skeletons. So you can pull one of these things out, find the thoracic vertebrae, kind of like this. So there's a certain amount of nerve motions associated with it. Again, they all attach here. The sternum, you have the manubrium, three pieces, where the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid, these are the costal part. The manubrium and the body need about this. It's got an inherent notch, manubrium or sternal notch. It's a useful landmark. You can trace somebody, get in line. You don't want to be sticking stuff in here where there's big carotid arteries. Body, obviously, the xiphoid, which is more disattached, and really they unite probably around the more than anything else. Who knew? So there's the manubrium, and when I do the appendicular, I'll bring that back out. Because the only juncture between your upper extremity and your axial skeleton is the clavicle as it contacts the sternum. The manubrium and the sternum. That's it. That's why you've got so much mobility here. Whereas you have those two auricular surfaces in the sacroiliac articulation, which has a lot of stability. So here you have the xiphoid really doesn't ossify until age 40. The notch, there's an angle and stuff like that. No big deal. Again, CPR, being sure you're mid-sternal. The ribs, 1 through 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, etc. And nothing. And there you're better than I. So there's a little facet here that articulates with the body, one on that transverse process, and then you can see it here going into costal cartilage into the sternum. Voila. We're done. So next time, I'm going to get all the bones out so you can start to look at them. If you want to stick around now and look at them, you're fine. I mean, I know it's long listening to me talk for an hour and a half. Even I'm tired of here.
I just want to see the scantrons.
Pardon me? Yeah, and again in the scantrons, if you haven't done them already up here, it would be just great. Okay. Thank you, thank you. If I get here early enough on Wednesday, I'll look at them. I'll run them. I probably won't have time tomorrow. Bye-bye.